Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. The Unstoppable Freedom Alliance is part of a growing movement across America that's fighting for freedom and the values and ideals that this country was founded on. And I'm super excited about our guest today. His name is Clay Martin. Let me tell you a little bit about Clay as we get started. He's a former USMC Infantryman, Scout, Sniper, and Reconnaissance Marine. He crossed over and finished his career in SOCOM, or in other words, Special Ops Command, where they synchronize planning of global operations against terrorist networks. He retired from the 3rd Special Forces Group after a long career as a Green Beret, with specialties including intelligence, sniper instruction, master breacher, and counter terrorism. His clients in the past have included Special Forces folks, the U.S. Marine Corps, Force Recon, SWAT teams, and high net worth individuals. He gained his expertise in a wide array of combat skills, and this is not theoretical for him. With all things defense, he knows what works and what doesn't. He's also an author of Concrete Jungle, a Green Beret's Guide to Urban Survival, and Prairie Fire, Guidebook for Surviving Civil War II. Clay, let's go. Welcome to the podcast.
Jimmy, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
You know, first of all, hey, thanks for your service. I mean, that's pretty extensive. And thank you now for converting that experience with what you've learned to help the rest of us, everyday Americans, see things differently and get ready. Thank you for serving so honorably.
Hey, thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate it.
Okay, so, we're going to start with one simple question that we ask all of our guests. What do you love most about America and why?
Man, I got to go with the people. That's that's easy to say, but we look back at what the American people have accomplished ever since we landed on this continent to becoming, a world leader, both militarily, economically, and for freedom, most importantly. This really the thing you have to look at, I think, is our fellow man that lives here, and just be amazed, just absolutely amazed.
It is, like that, the creativity. The fact that we're ambitious, I think generally speaking, there's this ambition of really fulfilling your potential, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, right? I mean, we're not perfect, right? If you can get 10 people in a room to agree on something, you're accomplishing something, right?
Right.
Oh, man.
We're very stubborn as a people, but a lot of times in the right way.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. I do love the fact that in America, we have the opportunity to be creative and start businesses and also give back to the community for the betterment of others.
Right. Yeah. And fail along the way if we need to. Yeah. It's an imperfect system, but it's the best one we've got. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. I've heard the quotes, it's the best form of government over all the others. They're all bad. Right. But in the end, anyway. Hey, today we're going to focus on defense. We've had a couple of other guests on that have really talked about the challenges that we're facing. And you're the expert. You're the expert on defense, not only from a military perspective, but also self-defense from a community-based approach, and really so that we can weather the storms that might be coming. And I'll tell you this, and you know this, I know a lot of people who are very concerned about what's happening. You talk about conflict in our major cities. You talk about inflation, food shortages, government controls, taking our natural rights, our individual freedoms, even what's happening in our school systems with really what I would consider educational indoctrination. We seem to be more divided than ever before. And I know there's a lot of people also that see this through kind of a spiritual lens, a biblical lens, as I do, thinking that, hey, some rough times may be coming. We talked to, is that your perspective right now? Do you see the chaos happening around us?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's honestly the biggest thing that I see right now as far as indicators that we're in deep trouble. And I just don't think it's ever been like this. I'm also one of those people, I try to keep my crazy, contained.
Yeah.
And I think even running up to, 2016, 2017, I was like, it's not actually as bad as, say, the 70s when we had bombings all over the place. But I actually think, especially post-2020, it is actually worse than it's ever been. We're maybe not quite seeing the violence like we were. But then again, we destroyed $10 or $12 billion worth of damage in a summer of riots. We are seeing violence. It's just not. It's on a different scale than it was before.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I see all these indicators, and I just can't help but think that we're in for some big trouble here.
Yeah. I know, it's funny. The violence tends to come in cycles, or kind of ebbs and flows around the political cycle.
Funny how that works.
It's amazing how that works. It's kind of pretty absurd, actually. And I know a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of people that I know who are either in complete denial of this or absolutely unaware of what's happening. What do you say to somebody like that?
There's not a lot you can say. Unfortunately, it's very hard to change somebody's mind if they refuse to see it. The best thing I think we can do right now is keep having the discussion like we're having. Find the people that you can save. Yeah. Or they're starting to wake up to this and kind of, lead them down the path like, hey, look, man, you're not crazy. Like these things are all happening. And that's really all we can do. It's unfortunate that not as many people are as awake, but I don't know. I tend to agree with our mutual friend Tucker Max on that. When you can't wake some people up, it just can't be done.
When he said that actually kind of struck me a bit, because I'm always kind of the optimist in that, just feeling like, hey, if you present enough information and facts and have good conversations with people, that you can make a difference. And I'm hoping you can, but I think it's that group in the middle that's not sure. Right. It's not the extremes, right?
Right. You can't have somebody that's either on the extreme or that just refuses to see things happening. And I mean, that goes back to a whole, bastion of psychology, normalcy bias, all this other stuff that, some people just will never wake up to what's happening.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Tucker, and he calls himself a doomer optimist, which was, so I got introduced to that term, not too long ago, and it's a fascinating group, and I would consider myself much further into that camp than I would like to admit sometimes. But these are people that recognize and accept that very hard issues are coming, problems are coming. They see things coming down the road, but they still move forward with a sense of hope and optimism for what might come, right? And they're basically saying bad things are going to happen, but if we do the work to get ready, we'll be okay. Do you subscribe to that same philosophy?
I absolutely do. In fact, that was a great term that they coined there. But I mean, what else are you going to have? I'm a firm believer that we will win in the end. We will correct things. It's just, it's going to be an ugly road to get there. But I mean, you just have to have that hope that at the end, it's going to work out okay. Maybe not for us, but for our children, our children's children. And, really, what choice do we have anyway? I mean, you can't just get all bleak and it's just going to implode. We're going to lose. Like, that's a bad way. That's a bad way to look at things.
That's true. Well, it's funny you mentioned our kids and our kids' kids, right? The generational impact. I mean, I jumped into this fight for freedom, in the last 6 or 8 months. And I didn't do it for me. I figure I'm old enough that I'm going to weather whatever it is. It may not end as well as I wanted it to. But really, this fight for freedom, if you will, this fight for our system, our way, our values, is really about the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 generations, isn't it?
It is, and honestly, that's one thing that the people that are trying to destroy this country are doing better than we are. They're thinking generationally, which is ironic considering that they also don't believe in families or children, but they are still thinking in that multi-generational that way. And that's really what we have to start doing too. That's, I feel like, in a lot of ways where we lost our way. If you look back to the 60s and 70s, where it came all about what I want to do and this is great for me, that has infected us as a nation and destroyed our morals. I mean, right up until the present. And I'm not even going to say that I was immune to that. I started thinking about things a lot differently after I had children. My kids are only 3 and 5. And I think I was kind of like on the fence prior to that, like, hey, this is really not good. But after they were born, and especially as I saw what they're trying to do to our children, like, I really jumped in, both feet.
Yeah, it's funny. Most of my friends who are former military, who've had that kind of a long-standing career, start their families a little later in life. A lot of times that happens, right? Just like you. And I've got a bunch of Navy SEAL buddies that have done that. And I think a couple things. One is they are very, very in tune with what's happening in our schools and what's happening to our kids. And then secondly, you guys are better dads. Like, there's something
we try to be.
Right. There's something about being a dad later in life, that just gives you a different perspective, I think. Anyway, it's been pretty cool to get to see you all interact with your kids and raising that next generation.
Well, I think the big advantage with that, especially for us military guys, is we already took care of like us. We did our stuff and, our cool whatever. We had our status and our adventure time and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it allows us or focuses us a little bit more on our kids, and that's an important thing. I think everybody has the capability to do that. It's a lot easier if you're a little bit older.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, you know this too. Life experience. Like I'm so much smarter in my 30s than I was in my 20s.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Night and day difference.
If I could have just fast forwarded through a handful of selfish years in my 20s, jeez. God. It is amazing how things change, your perspective changes. So, but speaking of perspective, right? As you look ahead, I mean, you've written a couple books, and we will talk about that in a second because they're very good. I've kind of immersed myself in those. As you look at the landscape ahead, as you said, you kind of keep your crazy meter under wraps.
Try to keep it, yeah.
But at the same time, you want to be very sober-minded about the future. What do you see in the 3-month time frame, the 6-month time frame, this next 12-month time frame? What do you see as the biggest challenges or issues we're going to face?
Oh man, I think actually for me to talk about those periods, I have to back it up one space, and then I think a lot of military guys, and myself included, I was guilty of this. We have missed a lot of what happened in this country over the last 20 years because we were focused outward.
Yes.
So I know that it even took a couple years after I retired. But, around like 2015, 2016, when I've been out for a couple of years, I looked at what had happened to the country and I was like, this is, stunning. Like, this is amazing. Just the changes that have happened in 20 years with the way people think, the political actions, all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So really, I would say around like 2017, 2018 is when I started paying attention. Mm-hmm. And that was right around the time also that things really started coming apart. So that kind of led us to... now I'm fully immersed in this, and I'm trying to look at this the way that I was trained as an intel analyst, like what is going to happen. And man, we are in a dark position right now. Like I said, I don't wear the tinfoil sombrero, but I do wear a hat. I keep it in the closet and I pull it out when I need it.
Oh, sure. Don't show anybody.
Right. But the crazy thing I think that's really happened with this like predictive, like, okay, this is going to get bad. A lot of the stuff I put in print in one of the 2 books, even to include, I was writing about the election was going to be stolen in July of 2020. When I put that on paper, I was like, well, hope I'm right on this one or else I'm going to be, I hope I'm right. I hope I'm wrong too. It'd be cool to be wrong. Like, okay, well, that everybody's going to laugh at you from now on, but everything's fine.
That's right.
But putting that in print was a bold step. And then, whatever you think, things were definitely not okay in November. Things certainly didn't go smoothly. So that kind of feels that. Now, as far as where we are now, oh man, I don't want to be doom and gloom guy, but I'm also going to shoot you straight what I think is going to happen. I honestly think they're trying to break the U.S. dollar, and I think there's a good chance they just succeeded. The fact that we did all this sanctioning stuff to Russia, as well as stealing their money out of the central bank, and then they 1-2 punched us by linking the ruble back to gold and selling their oil at a discount, but forcing it to be paid for in rubles, has kind of elevated rubles from a trash currency to, in a lot of ways, like a global standard. Now it's the only one that's tied to a metal. That's a big deal.
That is a big deal.
It's a huge deal. I think that may succeed, and it's going to take a little bit of time for this to catch up to us. That may succeed in breaking the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and in that case, man, all bets are off. After that, pretty much the only thing that's kept us afloat when we've printed this, $8 trillion over the last 2 years, is the fact that ours is the reserve currency. The minute it's not, oh man, watch out.
Yeah.
Just absolutely watch out.
And I think, so it's interesting. Russia's our enemy at least publicly. And then behind the scenes, we're working to actually elevate Russia in many ways and devalue America at the same time. It's just a stunning thing. One of the things I learned years ago was this: there's very little truth coming out of our media. And so therefore you have to look at alternative sources for news and information. And we found many, many good sources of news and information aside from the mainstream media. But it was interesting. When the conflict with Ukraine and Russia started to happen, we all tuned into media again. We all tuned in and said, oh my gosh, they must be telling the truth. And I remember about 3 days in, Clay, this is one of those moments I'm like, wait a minute. 3 days ago, I didn't believe a thing that the media was telling me. Why am I believing anything now?
Oh yeah, it's easy to get wrapped up in it. And here's the thing that you had to, even as a cynic about media and stuff, they do a very good job most of the time. Like they are really good at their jobs. And that happened. It happened to a lot of people. And it suckered us all right back in. And a lot of it took, some of us a couple of days ago. Some people are still just buying hook, line, and sinker. Yes. I mean, they were using video game footage as combat footage.
And these are national media sources, right?
Right.
I know. It is troubling. And so therefore, you kind of have to reorient, right? So the currency's big, right? Because the currency links directly to, we've got inflationary pressures now. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing the inflationary pressures. You're seeing us print money to solve our problems, which never ends up in a good place.
Right.
If the dollar's pancaked, what happens to our economy? What happens?
Oh, man. This is, as not being an economics guy, there's only so far I can go into this as far as like what I think will happen. But, let's just say it does crater everything. There's a good possibility that also this was done on purpose to get us away from cash and back to a digital currency, which has been openly talked about now, too, by the White House. I mean, this isn't even, fringe stuff anymore. This is front and center.
That's right.
The Central Bank of Canada was hiring 6 or 8 months ago. They were listing positions for developers for a cryptocurrency for their central bank. That's the direction that all this is pointing. That may take a little longer, but I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to crash the U.S. or the dollar system so that cash is essentially what we have now is essentially, wallpaper, just like in the Wii Mart or something. Yeah. Switch everybody over to a digital currency. Yeah. And then that obviously just invites a whole host of other problems.
Yeah. It's interesting. If that happens, then, America stops being the single greatest force for freedom in the world. We won't have the economic power to be a power in the world. And then, then you do worry about how wars and rumors of wars and more conflict happens because there's not really that safeguard with America being, in it to say, hey, this isn't going to happen. And I think we're experiencing some of that now.
Well, I think so, too. I really believe this was also part of the 2020 election cycle and what we got. Yeah. As soon as that went down, I was like, this is a controlled demolition of everything that we have. The dollar, the only thing that hasn't happened yet that I predicted, that I've seen, I actually thought, and this is extremely cynical, I thought they would put us in a position for an engineered military defeat. So we got some good casualties. We took a hit on the national stage. But most importantly, that's kind of the last institution that those of us here in the Midwest, flyover country, ma and pa kettle, really believe in. So if you could shatter the faith in that one too, well, you've broken every institution in America right there.
Yeah. And it feels that way. And, how much of what's going on in America, everything feels destabilized.
It does.
We've talked before about psychological operations, right? About, things that are happening. How much of what we're seeing is that type of behavior, that type of activity?
Oh, man.
Because you have a military background, you know exactly how to do this,
right? It's staggering. The scale is how I'm going to put it. Pretty much everything since like March of 2020 has been a lie. In some way or another. We can look at the coronavirus stuff from that. Even if you say that we got duped by the Chinese, because they were putting on a good front over there too. If you were paying attention to alternate media sources around like January, February 2020. It was crazy. They were welding people in their apartment complexes building these. You're taking the fire hoses and like icing down entire neighborhoods. It looked like a planet killer. Yeah. And then we bought into that. And then as others have pointed out, every government on the planet had the same response in like a week, which doesn't happen to anything. No. So, and then just pretty much everything forward to that has felt like a psyop of some level. Yeah, it's been insane actually.
And you've seen otherwise free countries. I look at Australia. I look at Canada.
Oh, man. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they're all acting like totalitarian states where, we declare these emergency powers. Even in America, of course, we're still under a public health emergency, which for the life of me, I can't understand why. But we know why. It's because they can usurp the Constitution. They can bypass the Bill of Rights. They can do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But we're seeing this happen in Australia. We're seeing it happen in Canada, our northern neighbor, and it seems very coordinated, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. It feels extremely coordinated. There's never been another time that I've seen governments all jump in and act in the same way, according to the same. you can't even tell me this is an information age thing, or we all listen to the Who now. Like I don't buy that for a second. Like that's never happened. Like that's counter to how we operate.
It is. Well, listen, you have you've written some great books. I mean, not only the two that we're going to talk about today, but others, and which is pretty impressive for a former military guy. I'm just going to tell you, I didn't want to pick on you too much on this, but you either have a good editor or man, you're smart.
A lot of my friends said the same thing. Like, you can type? Like, yeah.
You can type. You can type. Yeah, I just don't blow up things. Okay. All right. So listen, I think two of the books that are really important and we need to talk about are Concrete Jungle, right? The survival guide for city dwellers, and then Prairie Fire, which was kind of a follow-up to that. I thought the timing of at least when the Concrete Jungle came out for sure, was really important. Tell us about that. It came out in a time when we kind of needed it, right?
Oh man, I got to tell you, looking back, Concrete Jungle could almost be described in a I try not to feel this one too much, but it almost feels like divine intervention saved that book. And here's why. I actually saw this coming back in like 2019. And that's when I wrote the book, most of it. I wrote like 3/4 of it. So I was actually under a publishing contract at the time. I had an agent, all this other stuff. Well, nobody would buy that book. So they're like, no.
Crazy.
You're right.
You're crazy.
Right. Just absolutely no. Well, then I actually lost my house in a house fire in January of 2020.
Oh, my gosh.
So lost all my stuff. And so then, we're living in a rental house. And fast forward to just a couple of months. I think it was June when the George Floyd riots really started. And these things started blowing up. And I'm like, oh, man, I wish I had this book, because it was basically written for an event like that. So I'm sitting there thinking about it. And I remember that I sent it to a friend to like proofread, a year ahead of that. So I call him up and he's like, hang on, let me check. And he goes to his sent items folder and he's still got it. So
no way.
Yes way. So he sends it back to me. I make a couple of edits, and it hit Amazon like 4 or 5 days later.
Wait a minute. So you could have you did lose this in essence in the fire.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh my gosh. That gives me chills, man. I mean, seriously.
It was wild. It
is divine intervention. That should deepen your faith quite a bit.
Oh yeah. Yes, it was. Looking back on it, I mean, it's borderline unbelievable. One, that I had gone ahead and written it at a time when it was pointless to do, and then two, that somebody still had it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, one in a trillion shot.
Yeah, it's amazing. And really, then the truth of it is that book speaks specifically to what was happening. I mean, peaceful protests are protected under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's a beautiful part of America, right? That you can peacefully protest. You can show up at your state capitals, for example. You can show up in your neighborhoods. You can show up at the school board meetings. Peaceful protests are always protected in America, although you wouldn't necessarily know it today. But what was happening then? Those weren't peaceful protests.
No,
they weren't even mostly peaceful protests, were they?
Not even a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that stuff was off the chain, but it's also predictable if you've seen it before. And a lot of us that have spent a lot of time overseas, like we've seen, this is exactly how things evolve. You start with a little protest and you push a little bit, and the next thing you know, you're killing people and setting things on fire. If you're getting away with that, then you just keep going. You start getting crazier and crazier.
Yeah.
As well as one thing that I think a lot of people missed was there was an incredible command and control of those riots.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you don't even have to be sitting at a fusion center to see it. If you could watch some of the drone feeds and really pay attention, you would see usually little white cars driving around. That was like their command and control element, and they would go in and they would do some stuff and they would leave, and then that section of the riot would take off and start acting crazy. Yeah, it was really well coordinated. Then also the one of the things with a riot, when you're trying to, let me think about how deep I can go into this. Okay, we're just going to do it.
Let's go.
When you're starting a riot on purpose, which is actually one of our jobs as well, part of the thing you want in there is your own agitators, and those are the people that you specially train. You take a handful of them, and they're the ones that really escalate things. They throw the first brick. They do the first looting. And then once everybody else sees them do it, they just kind of follow through with it. And you take those guys and you get them out of there because they're valuable resources. You stick them in a little white car and you drive them away. And just let the madness flow after that. So, I mean, everything in those riots was straight out of the playbook. I mean,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Okay, so I have got a bunch of buddies that are NFL coaches. One of my closest friends is an NFL coach, and he would occasionally show us film, and I asked him, "Can you break it down?" And he would break down this film, and he would see stuff that there's no way I saw.
Right.
In fact, I didn't see any of it until he showed me, and then, man, the whole game changed for me. This is what you're doing. You know, you have experience in this. You see things through a different lens, and you're helping us who aren't going to look at it that way to see things differently. I would not have said, although I've done a lot of research on this, the average person is not going to say, oh, there are paid agitators. This is coordinated. Right. But you see all of that, right?
Right, exactly. Because, I mean, it goes back to that experience thing. Like, I've been on the other side of this.
What do you in that first book, The Concrete Jungle, give us a couple of the most important things in that book for the everyday person who's living in that environment and is concerned about their safety, because it's likely that type of behavior is going to happen again. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, back to that book was pretty much purpose written for people to survive in that type of environment. And again, you haven't fought in cities a lot, and both organized and shut down these kind of riots and stuff. Like, we know exactly how that goes. So honestly, the biggest difference in both books, I think that I did different than anybody else, is I believe in a community-based defense. Like, I just don't think you can do any of this stuff yourself. And, the way I always say that to people is like, check it out. You want to pull out like paper resumes. Like, I'm combat guy, like, I'm hunter and all this other stuff. Like, I can't do any of this stuff alone. Like, not a chance. Like, I'm way better off with like 2 18-year-olds supporting me in my house than I am by myself. Yeah. If nothing else, not only can I not do all these tasks, but I have to sleep sometime.
Yeah, so, exactly. Well, and I've heard it's interesting because this perspective I've been reading about your community-based approach, which I think is the only way to go. And we're going to dive into that a little bit harder. I know Tim Kennedy is like, he's probably one of your buddies. He's like, hey, give me 3 other guys and we can do just about anything you need us to do.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's funny. Me and Tim actually went to the Q course together, the Special Forces course.
Is that right?
Yeah, it is. But he's
absolutely right. So
who's
crazier, you or him?
Depends on what we're doing.
Good. That's good to know. That's fun. Well, I follow him a lot. I follow you. It's fun to see the similarities there. So, we're going to have to get you guys back in the same room for sure.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome. And I'm sure Tim approaches it the same way that I do. We think of ourselves with Special Forces guys, like, we're exponentially more dangerous the more of us that there are. Like, I can do some stuff by myself. You give me like one friend, like all of a sudden we can do X, Y, and Z. You give me 3 friends, we can do like 25 things now. Right. And on and on and on. So that's really how I think everybody else needs to think about it too. Like, I need like some dudes that are also into this, and then we're much more dangerous. Oh yeah. Well, for sure. And I think that whole coordination, I think the fact that you see things from a command and control perspective, from being able to organize, is going to be super helpful for the average American and for me and my community and others. And I think that's the big differentiator right now about what you're doing is you're helping people get prepared right where they're at. Right. That's honestly, that's the way that we had to live it too. It'd be awesome if I could go to a ranch 5 hours from now and have like 100 of my friends and like, I don't know, solar and wells on it. But it's not realistic for most people. Yeah. Like, most people are either scraping by where they are, or they don't have a huge amount of extra resource. Yeah. So you are kind of stuck. And as the economy gets worse, you're more stuck. So we have to kind of prep for where we are with what we have. Yes. Okay, so with the books, of course, I think one of the things that I saw that you experienced was the fact that there were so many people that were waking up to the conflict and the chaos, and they became motivated to do something like, oh my gosh, I now see it. I'm concerned. I'm concerned for my own safety, for the safety of my family. What do I do? Is that something that happened from those 2 books coming out? It was, as well as just a general, changing of the tide. COVID actually did a lot for that. Yeah. There were more guns sold in the 3 months after COVID was declared an emergency than like the 3 years prior to that. That's amazing. It's just absolutely unreal. And, it was really funny, too. A lot of those people were like anti-gun people like 10 minutes before that. Oh, yeah. Like, of course. If you had friends at like the local gun shop level, they're like, this guy came in, wearing like a Bernie Bros t-shirt. And I was like, I need a blaster like right now.
I need a blaster.
And some high capacity magazines. I want the biggest ones you've got.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, you know, everyone's a pacifist until their family's threatened. You know, like, okay, well, now what? You know, and listen, it's funny because, and I know that you started your business, Clay Martin Defense, and you've got a ton of resources online. Tell us about your specific mission to utilize your experience to help everyday Americans. What is that about?
So, you know, like I said, I really see that we're in a conflict. We're in a battle for the cultural soul of this country. And in a broader sense of community-based defense, knowing that I can't do this alone, and my little, you know, group of people that I can influence right here in my town can't do this alone. Yeah. You know, I have a very much vested interest in all of the other people that think the same way that I do, being prepared and having their stuff together and in one bag. And preferably without wasting a bunch of money on, you know, nonsense. Just here's the essential stuff, and that way you can start doing the important things like getting food and you know, working with your friends, that kind of thing. Yes. So that's really what I'm trying to do with the Clay Martin Defense thing. Is it's a step by step. It's all free. Like, here's, if you had nothing yesterday, here's what you do, and then you do this, and then you do this, and on and on and on. Yeah, and that's good. We're adding to that every day as much as we can. Right now, it's a lot in kind of actually my least favorite part. Right now, we're in the purchasing part. Like, here's all the stuff you need. Yes. And then later on, we're going to get to the, like, here's the training stuff that you need. So perfect. So we're working towards that goal. That's great. And, you know, so I've dug into what you're doing, and it's super helpful. You know, it's funny. I've got friends that all know that I'm prepared or getting prepared, and we'll talk a little bit about what preparation means, because you've really opened my eyes to what real preparation looks like. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But they all tell me, hey, if you know, if bad things happen, we're coming to you. And I'm like, no, you're not. Whoa. You know, what do you mean? You're going to come take my food? You're going to, you know, ask me to protect you? Yeah, that's very common, man. We see that one all the time. We saw it a lot more before this generation of preppers. But before that, was like it was like a running joke. Like, I'm going to show up at your house. Like, yeah, no, you're not. I'm like, only if you're going to help. I mean, and what I've used that as a springboard to say, hey, listen, let me help you get prepared so that we're all in it together. That's exactly how you do it, man. That's it. Yeah. So, and the truth is, most Americans are beginners in this whole prepping thing, right. and maybe their ideas about prepping. Tell us about what most beginners think of when, and we've all been guilty of it. I don't want to point any fingers. What do we think we need to do to get ready? I have to. It goes back to. I think a lot of the problem goes back to the cultural roots of prepping in this country was almost always based on nuclear war. You know, it started in like the 70s and then got really big in the 80s. Well, that's a whole different animal, man. Like, that's a whole different environment. Like, that is kind of like, maybe I'm the only person left alive, and that became the kind of the mantra, like the last man on earth kind of prepping. Yeah. So you dig a hole in the ground and have all kinds of stuff. Well, that's honestly just not very realistic. Even for nuclear war, it probably wasn't that realistic either. But I get it. Everybody had to do something. Yeah. But for where we are, it's definitely wrong. Yeah. So it's like this idea of, hey, let me get a little food supply. Let me make sure I got a little bit of water. I could weather 30 days. Hey, no problem, you know? Yeah. But that isn't going to cut it. If what's coming is coming, and hey, if we're wrong, we're ready. Hey, cool. Yeah. If we're wrong, we're ready. You know? Right. But if we're right, then we're going to be able to survive and then thrive. And I think that's the key, right? But 30 days worth of anything isn't probably going to help us that much, is it? No, it's really not. And it goes back to looking at this as a systemic problem. Like, they're trying to break everything about the American way of life. So, you know, it's a lot more important to have food that's sustainable. And by that, I mean, like, replicates itself. Like, I have chickens in my backyard. I live in town and I have chickens in my backyard. Come on. 14 of them. Listen, my daughter would love you. She would be over there. She'd be taking care of these chickens. She's 19, but when she was younger, she couldn't get enough of these chickens. Oh, man, it's funny. There's only like 3 places in the United States where you can't have chickens. You can have chickens in LA and New York City. Come on. It's crazy. I did a bunch of research on it. I wonder if you can have them in Fort Collins. So, you know, we're going further and further left here. So I don't know. Probably depends on your HOA. Yeah, that's for sure. But that's this idea. You know, I've got rancher friends out here that I'm buying into with herds of goats. We need food that's like sustainable. And by that, I mean, it grows itself. I mean, obviously, they're also trying to break our fertilizer prices as well as our diesel supplies right now.
Yeah.
So thinking about what can I do with like a little garden in my yard with water that I can actually, carry my pail and either go to my well or for me to walk down to the river.
Yes.
What can I do when I'm talking about like these hands to keep myself alive?
Yes.
That's a lot of where we need to be thinking. And a lot of that then becomes this kind of communal idea again. I can do a lot more if I have 5 or 6 friends.
Right.
I pick a day to go weed the garden, and they have a day, and blah 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 on down the line. So that's really where we need to be thinking, not like me alone for 30 days, me for the next 3 years.
Yeah, don't go into the bunker. Instead, you're going to have to create and contribute. And I think this idea of community is probably the most important thing that we're learning. And I think there are some natural occurring communities like the church community. I think of the faith community that I'm part of. My gosh, the network of people in our town around the churches is by the tens of thousands.
Right.
So you kind of already have some built-in structures where you can go where you share the same values and you can, coordinate some of your efforts in order to really thrive through this stuff. Thanks for listening to this podcast of Part 1 with Clay Martin. Make sure to tune in next time where Clay unpacks the community aspect of preparing for self-defense. See you then.